Jake never thought a bus ride could change his life, but as he sat in the crowded city bus that morning, he was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. The bus was unusually packed, and the city's usual chaos hummed outside the windows. He had just finished a grueling shift at the diner, his stomach grumbling for the first time in hours. The only seat left was next to a man he barely noticed at first, a black man in his late 30s, dressed in a neatly pressed suit with a worn briefcase beside him. Jake hesitated. He didn't even know why he hesitated. His parents' offhand comments, his friends' teasing, the echo of jokes he had laughed at as a kid, all of it swirled in his head. He didn't want to sit next to the man. Something in him, something he had never questioned until that exact moment, whispered that he should move. He looked around the bus. Every other seat was taken, the aisle crowded with people clinging to the poles and handles. His heart beat faster. The man beside him noticed the hesitation and gave a polite, understanding smile. Jake felt a flicker of shame but ignored it, turning instead to the window, pretending to stare at the cityscape that he barely registered. "Hey," Jake muttered under his breath, more to himself than to the man. "Could you move over?" His voice was low, but firm enough to make the man pause. The man tilted his head, a mix of confusion and sadness in his eyes. "Excuse me." Jake felt the weight of the words after he said them. He hadn't meant to sound rude, but he did. The man shifted slightly, giving Jake just enough room if he wanted to scoot over. But Jake didn't. He crossed his arms, muttering something about being tired and needing space. A few passengers nearby exchanged glances, sensing the tension but unsure how to intervene. The bus lurched forward, and Jake's anger, half fueled by exhaustion, half by the fear of confronting his own prejudices, grew. He wanted to leave, to escape the guilt rising in his chest. But the bus wasn't moving fast enough to get him out of the situation. And then it happened. The bus jolted violently as it hit a patch of slick asphalt. People shouted, some stumbled. The man beside Jake reached out instinctively, trying to steady a young mother and her toddler who had been thrown off balance. In that split second, Jake's eyes caught a glint from the man's briefcase, a small metallic case slightly dented, sliding dangerously close to the edge. Without thinking, Jake lunged forward, yanking the case before it fell onto the little boy. His adrenaline surged, and for a moment, the only thing he could feel was relief. He had saved the briefcase, and maybe even the toddler from getting hurt. But relief quickly turned into mortification. The man, standing now and straightening his suit, didn't look angry. He looked at Jake with a mixture of surprise and something that struck deeper than anger, disappointment. "You know," the man said quietly, almost softly, "this could have been avoided if you'd just been willing to share a seat." Jake froze. His face flushed, not just with embarrassment, but with something heavier. Shame. He had spent years avoiding moments like this, moments that forced him to confront his own biases, and here it was, staring him right in the face. The bus continued its bumpy journey, and Jake found himself watching the man. His name, he would later learn, was Marcus Bennett. Marcus worked for a local nonprofit, helping underprivileged youth navigate the complexities of the city's education system. Jake had assumed, incorrectly and cruelly, that Marcus didn't deserve the space he occupied. As the minutes stretched, the weight of his own actions pressed down on him. He wanted to apologize, to explain, but the words seemed trapped in his throat. He realized that in trying to preserve his own comfort, he had been blind to the humanity of someone else. The bus stopped at a red light, and Marcus looked at Jake again. This time, there was no judgment, only a quiet patience that unsettled Jake even more. "You okay?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but carrying the weight of genuine concern. Jake swallowed hard. He wanted to lie, to shrug it off, but the knot in his stomach wouldn't let him. I'm sorry," he finally said, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean. He trailed off, realizing how hollow excuses sounded. Marcus nodded slowly. "It's okay," he said. Most people don't realize what's in their hearts until they're forced to see it. Something about the statement struck Jake. He had never thought of it that way, never considered that his fear, his prejudice, and his discomfort were all reflections of what he hadn't examined within himself. The bus lurched again, and the city blurred past the window. For the first time, Jake looked at Marcus not as an inconvenience, but as a person. Someone with struggles, responsibilities, and a life he would never have imagined if he stayed in his own bubble. The bus was nearing Jake's stop, but he didn't move. Instead, he watched Marcus as he helped an elderly woman with her shopping bags, steadying her with a polite smile. Every small action, every quiet kindness, chipped away at the barrier Jake had built around himself. He wanted to believe that he was a good person, but good intentions weren't enough. Actions mattered. As the bus came to a stop, the driver called out, "Next stop, Oak Street." Jake felt a lump in his throat. This was his moment. He could step off and leave everything behind, pretending nothing had happened, or he could take the tiny, humbling step forward. Thank you," Jake stammered, almost losing his courage. "For, being patient." Marcus looked at him with that same calm gaze. "It's not about patience. It's about understanding." Jake's stop arrived, but he lingered, suddenly unwilling to leave the lesson behind. He wanted to learn more, to do better. "Can I walk with you a bit?" he asked. Marcus raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise crossing his face, but he nodded. "Sure. Let's talk." The bus pulled away, leaving behind the noise and the bustle, but in that moment, a conversation began that neither man would forget. They talked about childhoods, mistakes, and the invisible walls people build around themselves. Jake admitted his ignorance and fear, the casual prejudices he had never challenged. Marcus shared stories of his youth, of times he had been judged before being understood, of the people who had given him a chance when he least expected it. By the time they parted ways, Jake felt a weight lift off his chest. It wasn't just relief, it was the beginning of transformation. He realized that sitting in discomfort, confronting the parts of himself he didn't like, was the only way to grow. And Marcus? Marcus had reminded him that empathy was not a weakness, it was a bridge. Jake walked home that day feeling both small and expansive at once. Small, because he had seen how far he still had to go. Expansive, because he had seen the possibility of change, not just in the world, but within himself. And as he reached his apartment, he knew one thing with certainty, he would never let fear or prejudice dictate his actions again. That one bus ride, one simple choice, had changed the course of his life forever. After that day, Jake couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. Every time he caught himself complaining about trivial things, he remembered the calm, measured way Marcus had handled the chaos on the bus. It was humbling, even a little painful, but in that discomfort, Jake began to understand something he had never allowed himself to see, the difference between living in fear and living with courage. He started noticing his own thoughts more closely. The casual judgments that used to roll off his tongue without a second thought now made him pause. He remembered the tight knot in his stomach when he refused to move on the bus, the hollow defensiveness that had come naturally to him. He hated that part of himself, but he couldn't ignore it anymore. It had to be faced, learned from, and changed. Days later, Jake found himself volunteering at a community center across town. He didn't have a plan at first, he just knew he wanted to do something different. The first day, he walked into a room full of kids laughing, arguing, and playing games, and he froze. They were all races, all colors, all stories that didn't look like his own. And yet, the warmth and energy in the room was undeniable. Marcus was there, as a guest speaker, sharing stories about the challenges kids face growing up in neighborhoods where opportunity isn't guaranteed. He spoke with passion, humility, and the kind of authority that comes from experience rather than entitlement. When he spotted Jake in the crowd, he nodded in recognition, the same calm, understanding gaze that had stayed with Jake since the bus ride. After the session, Marcus approached him. You came back, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Jake swallowed, feeling a little embarrassed. I wanted to do better. I mean, I know I messed up before, but I want to change. Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded again. Good. Change starts with that, he said. But it's not about one apology, or one choice. It's about what you do from here. The words sank deep into Jake's chest. It wasn't enough to feel bad about the past, action had to follow understanding. He signed up to volunteer regularly, helping kids with homework, organizing small events, even teaching basic computer skills. He realized that the more he gave, the less room there was for the old prejudices he had clung to. One afternoon, as Jake helped a group of teenagers build a small robotics project, he overheard two of them arguing about who would get to use the computer first. The voices were tense, sharp, and all too familiar. He took a deep breath and intervened, not as a disciplinarian, but as someone who had learned to see beyond surface-level differences. Hey, he said gently, why don't we figure out a way to share? Everyone deserves a chance. The kids looked at him skeptically at first, but slowly, a solution emerged. They worked together, taking turns, helping each other troubleshoot problems, and by the end of the session, they were laughing, celebrating their small victories together. Jake felt a swelling of pride, not in himself, but in their ability to rise above pettiness, to choose cooperation over conflict. It reminded him of Marcus on the bus, steady and calm in the middle of chaos. That image stayed with him as he walked home that evening, thinking about how one small act of courage, choosing to confront one's own fear and prejudice, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he had never imagined. Months passed, and Jake's life began to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. His friends noticed. He was quieter at times, reflective in ways that used to make him seem distant. But he was also more confident, more grounded, and more willing to speak up when something didn't feel right. Conversations that might once have ended in jokes at someone else's expense now ended with understanding, questions, and empathy. One day, he ran into Marcus at a coffee shop near the community center. Marcus was holding a small stack of books, obviously preparing for another session with the kids. Jake approached, smiling nervously. Hey, he said. I wanted to thank you. For that day on the bus. And for everything since. You didn't just teach me about patience. You taught me about responsibility. Marcus laughed softly, the kind of laugh that didn't judge, that didn't carry superiority. You're welcome, Jake. But remember, the credit is yours. I just gave you the chance to see yourself. You chose to change. It was a turning point for Jake, the moment he realized that life didn't always give second chances, but when it did, it demanded action, not just reflection. He promised himself that he would never let fear, prejudice, or ignorance dictate his choices again. As he left the coffee shop, he noticed a young boy struggling to carry a heavy backpack across the street. Without hesitation, Jake ran over to help, steadying the boy, making sure he crossed safely. The boy's grateful smile reminded him of the toddler on the bus months ago, the small but powerful moments where compassion made all the difference. Later that night, Jake sat on his porch, reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. He thought about the countless moments he had wasted judging people he barely knew, the opportunities he had let slip by because he refused to confront his own fears. And he thought about Marcus. The quiet, steady presence that had given him the push he never knew he needed. Jake realized that transformation wasn't a one-time event, it was a lifetime commitment. It wasn't just about sitting in the right seat on a bus, or saying the right thing to a stranger. It was about facing the parts of himself he didn't like, understanding the lives of others he had ignored, and consistently choosing empathy over fear. In that moment, he made a promise, not just to himself, but to the people whose lives he would touch from that day forward. He would choose courage, even when it was uncomfortable. He would choose understanding, even when it demanded humility. He would act, not just reflect. And for the first time in his life, Jake felt truly free, not free from the world's chaos, but free from the chains of his own ignorance. Because he had learned the hardest lesson of all, that the smallest choices, made with courage and empathy, could change not only one life, but many. And that sometimes, the seat beside someone you fear is the very place where transformation begins.